Hi, Neil Lazarus here, and welcome to another podcast. We're going to be looking today at annexation, whether we should be annexing from July the 1st the West Bank. Now, before we go on, a lot of things are happening here in the news, including the riots which are taking place in the United States as we speak. But maybe that's for another time. I hope your family is keeping well. When we talk about annexation, one of the major things which is important to consider is what annexation plan we are talking about. Are we talking about what Netanyahu first announced at the beginning of his election campaign, which is the annexation of the West Bank? Or are we talking about the Trump plan, which is slightly different? That Trump plan is going to be looking at also creating a Palestinian state, which the West Bank settlers are against, or is it including the whole of Area C? Now let's go back a bit. As you know, Israel was created in 1948 and takes control, and up until 1967 the West Bank was controlled by Jordan, Gaza was controlled by Egypt, Jerusalem was divided. Now Israel without the West Bank, as I'm sure you know, is only 9 miles wide. The West Bank is also, or Judean Samaria, is also high, it's mountainous, with the Jordan Valley, remember the lowest part of the earth, linking the Sea of Galilee with the Dead Sea. Strategically important for Israel, and actually been proposed, the annexation had been proposed also by the Labour Party there. So we've got a number of basics. Again, I remind you that we're talking about, in many ways, two different entities. Gaza Strip, which is part of the Trump plan, and the West Bank itself, which, again, arguably are two very different groups of Palestinians. And maybe that difference was originating from the occupation of Gaza by Egypt and the West Bank by Jordan for 20 years. Remember today that the West Bank is divided into 3 separate areas, areas A, B and C, where areas A are under Palestinian control. They're the major cities such as Jericho, Ramallah, Jenin, Kalkilia, etc. Areas B, which are meant to be jointly controlled, and areas C, which are under Israeli control. Now the question is, what's going to happen, and what is the price for each one of those different annexations? Let's have a look at some of the major arguments for and against. Those arguments which are for are, I would say, are based on a couple of different issues. One is the security issue, as I mentioned. In other words, that the West Bank provides a natural barrier for invasion and land invasion. Second of all, a religious argument saying that this, again, I'm going to come back to this idea of what does it mean to be a Jewish state? If you believe that Zionism is Jews living in the basic land, in their historic land of Israel, well, Judea and Samaria and the West Bank have more in common than with Jews in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv's only 100 years old. So again, we'll talk about it a bit later perhaps, is this idea of an argument for annexation, that this is natural historic land of the Jewish people. So security, historical. Thirdly, imposing a plan. In other words, the Palestinians have always said no. They don't know how to say yes. So let's impose a reality. The Trump plan would include a Palestinian state, although Netanyahu in the last days seems to be trying to placate his right-wing supporters. And it would be based on preconditions. Some people say that those preconditions are impossible to meet, but maybe that's another story. Now, that's all well, but there are some major problems if Israel does annex the West Bank. And we can define that into, one, the Palestinian security, economic and strategic prices. If we look at the strategic price, for example, of annexing the Jordan Valley, that could undermine the peace process with Jordan itself. And again, Jordan, if you look at the map, runs down the longest border with Israel. King Abdullah has said and warned that Israel would pay a huge price for annexing the West Bank. Look, his worry is the majority of his population are Palestinian. He's not. Would the annexation of the West Bank absolutely destabilize, if not end, Israel's peace treaty with Jordan? What would it do with the Palestinian Authority? Could it bring the Palestinian Authority to its knees? In which case, what would happen? Who would take control? Would it be Hamas, or would Israel be forced to take control? The economic argument against annexation, which has been made by a number of former generals, including managers of the Ministry of Finance, they have argued that economically annexations would hurt Israelis. They projected that an annexation tax would have to be added in order that the burden of what Israel would become responsible for Palestinians, i.e. if the Palestinian Authority had collapsed, would equal something like 25,000 shekels per family in Israel. Again, we can disagree or agree with that, but the question is an economic issue. On a security issue, the question would be, would seizing control of the Palestinian areas, what price would that take? In other words, at the moment, Israel is generally not on the street-to-street battles, the alley-to-alley battles that we saw during the First Intifada. Would we be going back to those scenes again? More than that, fighting, and it's estimated by some people at least, that fighting would follow the annexation of Israel. Although one wonders how extensive that would be. If we have a look when Israel the Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the violence was somewhat limited. So is there really a will to fight Israel? The left say yes. More than that, I think, but one of the biggest and oldest claims has been vis-a-vis the Palestinians and the demographic threat. In other words, if Israel was to annex the West Bank, the left in Israel would argue that what you would see is a parity of in numbers between Israel and the Palestinians. So, for example, if Israel annexed the whole of Area C, you would have 270,000 Palestinians annexed into Israel. What's going to happen with them? Well, Netanyahu said they're not going to get the vote. Well, if they don't get the vote, what status do they have? Because they're under Israeli control but not Israeli citizens. That's problematic. You would also have security control over 169 separate Palestinian islands, and the border would be 1,800 kilometers long. So again, some really problematic issues on a demographic issue and a threat to Israeli democracy, which I think comes down in many ways to the hardcore issues. Look, if Netanyahu just annexed the Jordan Valley, you would have 52,000, nearly 53,000 Palestinian annexed. You would have 12,778 settlers, 30 settlements, and 22.3% of the West Bank. That's just on the plan that he said, just the Jordan Valley. What I'm getting at is as follows. There's a fundamental question going on here in Israel, which is, what do we want as a country? If you believe in democracy, then it's quite difficult to justify annexing the West Bank. If you believe that the democracy perhaps is a Western value and not relevant to the Middle East, and that Jews should be in the historic land of Israel, well, like I mentioned, the West Bank is much more important than any other area. It's Judea and Samaria. It's where the prophets walked. I think Israel's going to have to decide, and perhaps is in the process of deciding, what it wants. For many of us who value democracy, annexation, I think, will provide a very big challenge to Israel and Israeli democracy. and one which I think at the end of the day would see Israel take over all of the West Bank. And I think that that's important. Now, some people are already saying, "Well, hold on, it really, there's not much difference. Israel's already had creeping annexation." Look, that may be true to some extent, but at the end of the day, what it would do is really formalize the situation. It would define where Israel's borders are. It would define who are citizens of the country and who are not citizens of the country, and it would, in many ways, really, for the first time, define who we are as a country. That ideological debate, which has been at the heart of the division between left and right. So that's where we are today. I'm fascinated to hear what your thoughts are. Should Israel annex the West Bank? Shouldn't we annex the West Bank? Is it a danger to democracy? So what are your views? Let me know, and we'll read them out in the next session, like on the next podcast. Like I said each time, what you can do is you can send me MP3 recordings and ask questions, and I'm happy to read them or play them. So just give me your opinions, what you think. Drop me a line via my website, awesomeseminars.com. Hope you enjoyed that quick briefing. I think that's where you need to be. Let me know what you think.